This is the Listening Books Podcast. I'm Jessica Stone, and today I've got a special festive episode for you. I'm chatting with colleagues Amy and Edward about books that somehow fit the theme of celebrations. We each chose 2 books that we thought fit that theme. So if you're looking for something to read over the holidays or going into the new year, maybe one of these will fit the bill. Just a little note that Edward is moving on to bigger and better things, so this is his last appearance on the podcast, and perhaps more importantly, his last opportunity to defeat Amy in the literary quiz at the end. So Edward, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, happy to. So the first book I chose today is Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. Evelyn Waugh was an English Catholic writer, and he was writing a lot of his books kind of mostly before and around the Second World War. A lot of his books deal with English aristocracy, and there are lots of scenes in books like Vile Bodies and other things like that of partying, of kind of raucous events. He's associated with the Roaring Twenties to a certain extent. And Brideshead Revisited is an interesting twist on that. It begins during the Second World War, and the main character is a guy called Charles Ryder, who's a kind of depressed middle-aged man. And he and his military unit are in the UK waiting to go to fight in Europe. And they're sent to create a camp at a English country house. And when Charles Ryder wakes up in the morning, he doesn't know where he's gone. He wakes up and sees the English country house and realizes that this house was owned by an aristocratic family that he had very close relationships with throughout the 20s and 30s. And so the book then goes into sort of a big flashback, and we start off at 1920s Oxford, where Charles was an undergrad student, and he meets this very charismatic figure called Sebastian Flight. And it's basically about Charles's entanglement with Sebastian and with the whole Flight family. So the early parts of the novel are full of celebrations. They can be quite debauched. They have descriptions of big gatherings, white tie events, black tie events, people drinking champagne, students behaving badly, that kind of thing. It celebrates and luxuriates in people's clothes, in male beauty, and in architecture, and has a certain kind of nostalgia for a kind of past English life. But as the book progresses, it's kind of about aging and about time and about memory. And so kind of later parts of the book, they kind of throw a harsh light on what we really enjoyed in the earlier parts, all the sort of drinking and having fun. Sebastian becomes an alcoholic and things like that. So it's kind of a melancholy book, but I think it's about celebrations in the simple sense that it has lots of scenes of partying that are generally really fun and really funny. Evelyn was a really funny writer, and a lot of his earlier books, he's very good at sketching very ridiculous characters. He's very good at celebrating, but also skewering members of the English upper classes. So it's very fun, and there's like a sense of sort of lightness and joviality earlier on. But later on, I think when you go through the slightly more painful stuff, I think the book starts to kind of focus more on celebrating kind of what is actually really important in life. And that's, like family and friendship and love and art and faith and things like that. There's amazing character in it called Anthony Blanche, who Charles meets at university. And later on, he has this amazing speech where he warns Charles about the Flight family and specifically about English charm. And he says, charm, is this wonderfully alluring feature of the way certain English people act. But he says it kills art and it kills love. I came to the book actually through the TV show, the 1981 Granada TV show that my parents were kind of obsessed with. And so I watched that as a teenager. And my sort of hot take is that the TV show is actually better than the book.
Oh.
Well, I think what the TV show cuts out from the book is that I think Evelyn Waugh, there's a slight sort of faint snobbishness that creeps through. in certain moments, and there's a bit more bite in his writing, whereas the TV show doesn't really have that. So I'd recommend both. They're both wonderful, and the prose is beautiful.
I'm really struck, Edward, by how you described that combination of lightness and melancholy, which I think is a really nice combination this time of year. I certainly, through December, I always feel that combination.
Yeah, I mean, the book, probably the structure of it resembles what it's like to go to a big party and then essentially be hungover the next day. You're tired, you're grouchy, you feel the downsides of earlier excess, but also you can kind of feel more tender and sad and actually more reflective on things. Yeah, it's a short book, but it's kind of epic in scope, and it manages to follow 20, 30 years of someone's life. So my second choice is a bit less obvious, but it's a book that I read very recently. It's in our listening books library, as is Brideshead Revisited, and it's another classic from the late 1930s, early 40s. It's called The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers. It's a really astonishing book. Carson McCullers was only 23 when the book was published, which is amazing in and of itself. And it's even more amazing when you read the book, which is an astonishingly empathetic book. And it basically follows the lives of a collection of characters in a small dead-end town somewhere in the south, the southern part of the United States. I think Carson McCullers was from Georgia, so it's kind of in a Southern Gothic genre, a bit like Flannery O'Connor and Barry Hannah and people like that. And it follows a variety of characters. There's the owner of the local cafe who's grieving his dead wife. There's a black doctor who is estranged from his family. There's an alcoholic communist. And then there's a lonely teenage girl who is obsessed with music and is sort of yearning to get out of the town. And they all befriend a central character, this really astonishing figure called John Singer, who is a deaf mute. And they're drawn to him because he radiates a kind of kindness and a kind of like magnetic goodness that they're all drawn to. I think partly because they're all kind of broken and unhappy in their own way. So it follows all their different separate lives, but how they revolve around the main character of John Singer. It's a weird book to choose for celebrations in some ways, and I probably wouldn't have chosen it had I not read it so recently. It's a really sad book, really deeply sad in many ways, but it's certainly not without hope. And I suppose my reason for choosing it for celebrations, which is maybe slightly tenuous, is something I alluded to earlier, which is that it's really celebratory of just human nature and the generosity with which Carson McCullers, at the tender age of 23, when, I don't know about you guys, all I was able to think about was myself. The amazing ability for her to make these characters seem so three-dimensional and so real, I think is really astonishing. And there are lots of moments of beauty and hope. And I suppose, even though it is very sad, it does celebrate human life, even in all its sort of frailty. So, yeah, I read it recently and it really blew me away. And I think it's just like a wonderful book.
Yeah, it sounds really good and incredible that someone can write that when they are 23. Like you say, when you're that age, most people are just very self-obsessed. And if they were going to write a book, it would be about like the one teenage character you mentioned, and that would be it. But then she's also included all these other characters in it as well that are very different.
Yeah. And so, I think the other sort of miraculous thing is how well she writes about people who are so different from her. I mean, she writes about middle-aged men incredibly well. She writes about a black family with, I think, amazing level of verisimilitude and kind of three-dimensionality for someone of that age and of that time from that part of the United States. So, yeah, all these characters, they're so fully realized. And again, it's a short-ish book, it's 300 pages or it's a standard-sized book, but it feels very epic. And no, I was really invested in it while I was reading in it. So it's really wonderful.
Those are two great choices, Edward. Thank you so much. Amy, I think it's your turn now. What books have you chosen that feature a celebration?
So the first book that I've chosen, it actually pairs quite well with Edward's first choice.
Ooh.
Because apparently it's been compared to Brideshead Revisited a little bit, and as well as it's also been compared to Talented Mr. Ripley and The Secret History as well. So it's all quite an interesting collection of books that it's been sort of aligned with. But I think it's been compared to Brideshead Revisited because it's like a big lavish house involved, and also you have the idea of a guy being welcomed into a very sort of posh family. And the book is called The Party by Elizabeth Day.
It's a bit on the nose, Amy.
Sorry, I tried to find something a little bit more subtle, but yeah, sorry, I'm just slamming you on the head with this theme. The Party by Elizabeth Day. And the audiobook is narrated by Stephanie Racine, who actually I mentioned earlier narrated one of the other books. She's obviously getting quite a lot of work. Good for her. Yeah, I realise actually now that this book is difficult to talk about without revealing too much of it, because it is sort of, there's a mystery at the heart of it. You wouldn't necessarily think it was like a crime mystery book, essentially, but there is a mystery kind of running through it. So I'll try and talk about it without revealing any key details or any spoilers. But basically, the book is about the friendship between the main character, Martin, and his friend Ben, who he met when he started at boarding school when he was in his early teens. And the party at the centre of the novel is Ben's 40th birthday party. And this is a very extravagant party. Ben is very rich. I think the event must have cost thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. And it's always very fun to read about these kind of lavish events that I'll probably never get to attend similar ones myself. So, you live vicariously through these characters. But under all the extravagance and all the celebrity guests and the champagne and everything, there's a very dark undercurrent, and there's dodgy dealings going on at this party and conspiratorial chats happening in corners and other things happening in corners that shouldn't be happening. And it also ends up being the scene of a crime. And I think basically, I don't know if, again, this is too on the nose, but I think this party is probably a metaphor for the lives of the characters in general. They're very sort of like opulent, fabulous, shiny people on the outside, but kind of grimy and twisted underneath. And the narrative is sort of split in several ways. And the party is sort of like the main narrative, but then we flash back to the past to reveal how Martin got to know Ben at school. And then we flash forwards to when Martin is being interviewed by the police after the party about the aforementioned crime. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that there was a crime at the party, because you find out very early. But over the different narratives, we build up a picture of this kind of weird and twisted friendship that they have, which is sort of based on obsession and secrets, and the party kind of being like a very hyperbolic symbol of this. And I found the whole book a little bit difficult to get into at first, because the characters are basically all quite unlikable. If you imagine all the characters from something like Succession, or even like some of the other books I mentioned earlier, like The Secret History, everyone is sort of a bit kind of mean. But then when you get into it, the intrigue does kind of keep you hooked. So I did really enjoy it. Like when I kind of got into it, it was really interesting how the party kind of was like the main sort of epicenter of this whole novel. But then you kind of have like all these flashbacks and flash forwards to tie the different parts of the story together. So yes, that is my first choice.
Very good.
And from celebrations that I use to conceal something sinister in a story to using a celebration for lighter purposes, my second choice is Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding. So I know pretty much everyone in the world probably at least has an idea of what Bridget Jones's Diary is about, even if they've not read it. But if you don't know, it's set in the 1990s, and it's a year in the life of 30-something singleton Bridget Jones, presented via her diary. And there are quite a lot of parties in the book, as you might expect, in a book that's based on the life of a 30-something singleton. And although most of the parties are situations from which awkwardness and a lot of humour arise, they sort of have other purposes as well, I think. Or I feel like Bridget Jones spends a lot of time in the story sort of receiving a lot of criticism about her lifestyle from like other members of, usually from like members of her family, older members of her family, sometimes colleagues. And I feel like this happens a lot at parties. And sometimes parties are sort of like the ultimate, I guess it's very concentrated at some of these family parties, because she has all these relatives left, right and centre asking her when she's going to get married and when she's going to have a baby. So there's one particular party in the book, it's a very famous scene in the film actually as well, where she's invited to a tarts and vicars party. She doesn't get the memo that the fancy dress element is cancelled, and she turns up as a Playboy bunny. So it's like obviously just supposed to be funny, but obviously very humiliating for her. And it's kind of like the ultimate humiliation on top of these parties already being a bit excruciating anyway, because she has all these people asking her stuff about her life and probing into her personal information. And then she is exposed literally physically because she's in this like, you know, little skimpy outfit and nobody else is. So yeah, the ultimate humiliation there for Bridget. But there's also some nicer scenes at parties. So she has this disastrous birthday dinner party where she makes blue soup. I can't remember what. I think it's because she makes celery soup and she ties it up with blue string and it makes the whole soup go blue. But then it ends up being quite sweet because Mark Darcy turns up to help her. Her love interest turns up to help her. And all her friends are there. And they're all very unfazed by her terrible cooking. Because I don't know, I can't remember if they say this cheesy line in the book, but they say it in the film where they all like raise a glass to her and like, oh, Bridget, we love you just as you are. And it's quite sweet, a contrast to her family parties where everyone's sort of picking holes in her life. And these friends are the people that are there for her. And she's kind of made a bit of a, you know, hash of this party, but they don't care because they just like spending time with her and with each other.
There's another really great party that I remember in the film where they're launching a book. She works for a publishing house and they're launching a book, and she keeps getting into kind of weird tangles with Salman Rushdie is there, and there's lots of jokes about her, like, you know, everyone keeps asking Salman Rushdie where the toilet is and stuff like that.
Yes.
But in the film, I took a screenshot of it recently, but when she has to give a really awkward speech, and when they turn the camera to look on the crowd, it's just for a second. You miss it normally, but then when you take a screenshot and look who's in the crowd, not only is there Salman Rushdie, Jeffrey Archer, who appear in the film, but there's also, as extras, there's Sebastian Faulks, Julian Barnes, and Alan de Botton. It's
wow.
It's
wild. Right.
So that's next time you're watching the film, it's a little
look out for those top literary cameos.
I was going to say, Amy, that just on that bit about the contrast between the parties she has with her friends with the blue soup and the parties she has with her family where they're picking her life apart. I was just thinking, like, the only party worth having is the kind where even when everything goes wrong, you are going to have a good time because that's who you're with. And yeah, that's a great lesson to take into the holidays.
It is. And it tends to be, you know, where you all have your best friends around you and stuff. So yeah, you're right. You could make that, you'd have a dinner party and you could make the most disgusting food. But if everybody's there who, you know, you get on with really well and you can have a laugh about it, then it doesn't matter. So, I did remember the work party as well. You mentioned Edward's, because there's a whole bit in the book and I think in the film as well, where she's like trying to come up with intelligent things to say and like remember things that she's heard about on the news. And it's like, I suppose you don't often have to do that at parties, but there is, I guess, an element sometimes if you're at a party and you're trying to sort of impress people and you're trying to think of like, sometimes there's a pressure there. Like parties aren't always fun when you're having to kind of like think of smart or funny conversation to say with people you don't know very well. So there's that element of like kind of celebrations as well, like a bit of stress of like not really being able to completely relax and enjoy yourself because you're like, oh, I must be fun and interesting. And I think Bridget gets a lot of that at these work parties that she has to go to.
Yeah. I think I like the fact that the entire premise is based on the fact that she, you know, it's a New Year's resolution, which is the ultimate post-party kind of regret, like I'm never going to get that drunk again, or I'm going to keep a diary, and the diary is sort of the only thing that sustains throughout the year. So
yes,
good point.
And like I suppose I'll just end with the fact that the book and I think the film starts and ends with the same party, which is, I think it's her mum and dad's friends' turkey curry buffet party. And at the beginning of the book, it's where she meets Mark Darcy, not for the first time because they knew each other when they were younger, but she's not seen him for ages, I don't think. And he's wearing some hideous Christmas jumper his mum made him. And it's just such a stark contrast to his personality. And then she sees him again at the end of the book. There's the same party. And so you've kind of got this thing where it's like this whole year has passed and all this stuff has happened, but it's sort of the same thing happening again, but kind of different this time because Bridget and Mark, I guess maybe I won't go into it too much in case there's people out there that want to read it for the first time or haven't seen the film. But yeah, they're at very different places at the end of the year. So you've got exactly the same event, but you're coming at it from a different angle. And he's wearing the same another weird Christmas jumper, which I think is, it's funny when you think of the fact that, so he was cast to play that character because he was in Pride and Prejudice as Mr. Darcy. Right. And I think because they mention Colin Firth in the book. So he was cast as Mark Darcy in the film. And then when you think of the most famous clothing of Pride and Prejudice is when he's like emerging himself out of the lake and he's taking his top off or whatever. And then in the film of Bridget Jones, it's him wearing a horrible Christmas jumper, but they're essentially supposed to be the same character, really. But yeah, so those were my choices. Jess,
those are good. Yeah.
What party celebration type books have you chosen to talk about?
Yeah, well, we've got a little through line here because, like, as you mentioned, Bridget Jones' Diary is, of course, a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice. And I found myself earlier in the year returning to some of Jane Austen's novels, including Pride and Prejudice, partly to prove somebody wrong on the internet, as you do.
Isn't that why we do anything?
Right, I know. I think somebody had made a claim about Mrs. Bennet, Elizabeth's sort of silly mother. At least that's how she's depicted in the novel. That didn't really hold up, and so, but I wanted to check my memory, so I was going back to confirm.
What did they say?
Oh, they were sort of saying that it was a mark of Mrs. Bennet's generosity and kindness, the way that she welcomed her daughter Lydia home once she had finally been married to Wickham, which of course, Wickham was forced to marry her and they came home in disgrace. Really, it was the best possible outcome out of only bad outcomes. And the way the novel depicts Mrs. Bennet's reaction is just that as soon as her daughter's married, she doesn't care about anything else. Like it's because that's all she cares about is to see her daughter married. And so it's really portrayed as a very silly reaction and a very thoughtless reaction. And so that was what I went back to just to confirm in my own mind how it was depicted. But it kind of just put me on the track to reread actually more of her work, because I kind of got sucked into thinking about what Jane Austen, based on the qualities that she makes fun of and the qualities that are admired in her heroines, I was just having fun looking at what virtues Jane Austen herself seemed to value and their counterparts in some cases. So I won't spend time going over the plots of Jane Austen's novels because I think most people are pretty familiar. The ones that are freshest in my memory are Pride and Prejudice, which of course has Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. And then you've got Sense and Sensibility, which has the two sisters, Eleanor, who's the sort of sensible one, and Marianne, who is the wildly romantic one. So I thought it was kind of helpful then when you set the theme for this book discussion, Amy, just to think about how Austen uses these celebrations as important opportunities for furthering the plot. In Austen's world, if you go to a ball, you can meet the love of your life who happens to be very rich, and you're set for life. And isn't that wonderful? But also, if you go to a ball, you are also exposed to the opportunity for humiliation. A bit like the way you were talking about with Bridget Jones. The same happens with Jane Austen's characters, where they overhear somebody insulting their looks, or they have to pretend they don't notice how embarrassing their family is being, or they might have to endure the really unwanted confidences. This is, in Eleanor's case in Sense and Sensibility, when she has to hear Lucy Steele confiding in her about her secret engagement to the person that is Eleanor's one true love. And so looking at all these, I was sort of thinking about these virtues that Austen's heroines have that she admires. So one of them is personal dignity, and it's kind of contrasted with self-importance. So I think maybe the best illustration of that is Elizabeth Bennet herself, who, even though she certainly doesn't have wealth and she doesn't have a whole lot of status either. I mean, she is a gentlewoman's daughter, but other than that, she doesn't have a whole lot to offer her. But she is not cowed by other people's importance. That's an important quality for her. She always maintains this personal sense of dignity and that she is also worthy of respect. But it definitely makes fun of people who have an outsized sense of personal dignity, which veers into self-importance, like your Mr. Collins. And even, the way Mr. Darcy is portrayed at the beginning, a bit too self-important, really. And then you see, like in the case of Sense and Sensibility, you've got this fortitude versus self-indulgence. And you've got Eleanor, who is bearing up under all of this knowledge that she did not want to be party to, that she can't tell anybody. Their circumstances have been vastly reduced, and they have to endure the company of well-meaning people who are still constantly embarrassing them. They bear a lot of humiliations, and Eleanor in particular is willing to forbear with them, whereas Marianne doesn't seem to see why she should need to exert herself until the end of the novel, really. And I think this is where I'll end my little lecture on Austen's novels, because I think that forbearance is a really good quality to think about when you're coming into a season where you inevitably, sure, you'll have the parties like Bridget Jones with her friends where the soup turns blue, but everybody's having a good time. But you're also, let's face it, we are also going to be in gatherings where, it might be an assortment of people that you have very varying degrees of relationship with. And
that was put very delicately, Jess.
So that was my pick. It was fun to return to those.
Just to add to the sort of celebration stuff, obviously in Austen, you mentioned like you go to a dance, you go to a dinner, you go see music. There's all these ways of grouping together. The one thing that always felt really strange to me was when suddenly women would get up and take a turn around the room, and they would just walk around the room in circles while other people were hanging out. And I think there's a scene in Persuasion where there's literally...
I still do that.
There's literally an entire hall. Do you? Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I'd be interested to see it. It would freak me out if someone did that, I think. But yeah, there's a scene in Persuasion where there's literally there's an entire hall dedicated to people just walking. They just walk around the room, chatting to each other. So weird. But,
Yeah.
But obviously it works for Amy, so...
Yeah, it does. Yeah. You get your steps up. You get your daily steps up.
Yeah, that's some of the main reason.
I hope you're enjoying this roundup of books that feature celebrations. Make sure to stay with us for the quiz, which is coming right up. This recording is an extended edit of a conversation that first appeared in the winter edition of our Listening Books audio newsletter, Connect. Connect is yet another benefit to Listening Books membership, with exclusive interviews with authors and narrators, and competitions that members can participate in to win a prize. That's in addition, of course, to the more than 10,000 audiobooks in the Listening Books collection. For more information about becoming a Listening Books member or gift memberships, head to our website, www.listening-books.org.uk. Now, Edward, it is your last opportunity to win the game.
I don't know. I can't remember what the tally is of who's won when. Has Amy won all times?
No,
officially?
I think you might have won the last one, Edward. I think so.
There was a disputed one.
I mean, Amy might have held back. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay, hang on. None of that.
Yeah. Don't patronise.
Yeah.
Poor old Edward.
Yeah.
Okay. So I took the theme of celebrations into the game, of course. And the very first question I'm going to put to Edward, and that is, who hosted the tea party that Alice attends in Alice in Wonderland?
I think that is the Mad Hatter.
Yes, it is. Point to Edward. Second question to you, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
In Anne of Green Gables, Anne feels so grown up the first time she gets to host her best friend, Diana, all by herself. But something goes wrong. What happens? And I do have a multiple choice here.
Oh, thank God. I've never read this, so this is going to be pure guesswork.
All right, here are the choices. A, she accidentally gives Diana food poisoning. B, she accidentally dyes her hair green. C, she accidentally gets Diana drunk. Or D, she accidentally cuts Diana's hair.
I think it's going to be... I don't think it would be drunk because they're kids, right? And this is a kid's book written a long time ago. I'm not sure that would be featured in that kind of story.
Canada, get that moonshine.
Okay. You're just trying to throw me off. Dyeing your hair green, I don't know why they'd be doing that. I'm going to say she accidentally cuts her hair.
Okay, that is not correct. So I'm going to put it to Edward now.
Is it Anne accidentally dyes Diana's hair green?
Do you mean, is that what I mean by the answer?
Yeah.
Or by the choice?
By the choice. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm going to go wild card. I'm going to say she gets her drunk by accident.
That is correct.
Hell yeah.
She does get her drunk.
No,
yes.
Really?
I told you.
I can't believe it. Well,
it's Marilla's cordial.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
So, next question. Edward, whose 111st birthday kicks off the events of J.R.R. Tolkien's Fellowship of the Ring?
I know this. It is the OG Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins.
Yes, the OG Hobbit.
From The Hobbit.
Yes, exactly. From The Hobbit. Well done. Okay. This is looking like a landslide here.
Oh, God.
Okay, I think the next question, Amy, is really for your own dignity.
What's left of it?
Yeah. In Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, the titular character does not get the reception she anticipated at her first annual ball. Why is that? And this is another multiple choice question. Although if you already know the answer, you can tell me.
I think I know it, but I'm a bit hazy on the specifics. So maybe give me the choices.
Okay, I'll give you the choices.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. A, because she was under the mistaken impression it was a fancy dress party. B, she had a wardrobe malfunction. C, she was styled exactly like her husband's dead wife. D, she immediately made a faux pas in front of her new mother-in-law.
Yeah, it's C, she dresses up as the dead wife.
Yes.
For some reason.
She doesn't know she doesn't know it. Mrs. Danvers says you should dress like the person in this painting, and she tricks her.
Oh, that's right. At this point, she doesn't know who it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I do have one more question. It is, just for more glory, really, Edward, because you've already got this in the bag. But let's see if you can answer this question.
Let's put Amy out of misery.
In Anne Patchett's Bel Canto, a party featuring a famous soprano goes wrong in what way? And I do have choices if you want them, but you might know the answer anyway.
No, I would like the choices, please. I don't actually know this one.
Okay. So A, a terrorist group takes the entire party hostage. B, the soprano refuses to sing. C, the host receives bad news and tells everyone to go home. Or D, a plague breaks out and they are all quarantined together.
Oof. I've absolutely no idea. I'm probably... I think I'll go with the initial thought that I had, which is that the singer refuses to sing. But I feel like it might actually be something a bit more wild. So, yeah.
So, final answer?
Yeah, I'll go with that one. She refuses to sing.
Which one? The soprano refuses to sing. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And that would have made for a better party, but no, that is not correct. Amy, do you know the answer to this one?
I don't know it. What was the other options? The plague breaks out and they have to stay there.
That's the best one.
Together.
Uh-huh.
Bad news is delivered and they have to go home. What was the other one?
And the other one is a terrorist group takes the entire party hostage.
Oh, let's go for that one.
That is correct.
Oh my word. I laughed hearing it for the first time, just assuming it was so...
well...
Man.
I think it's based on something that really happened.
Oof.
Yeah. And I think that book was what really catapulted Anne Patchett to... I mean, her previous books were successful, but I think Bel Canto was the one that really kind of put her on a lot of people's radar. And I was reading some essays of hers recently, and she was sort of saying that all her books really share one thing in common. They're all the same story, which is that a bunch of people are kind of thrown together and forced to stay together for whatever time period. Mm. And that's what happens in this book is, this group of different people who were there for a party. A lot of them were strangers because this was one of these like elite parties that's given for somebody important. And then they're just stuck with each other and with the terrorists. Yeah. It's a good book.
It's not a great way to advertise your catalogue of work, is it? To just say, I just write the same story every time.
But they're also different. But I like noticing that through line that they all have that in common. It's interesting to kind of look at it that way. Yeah. Okay. Well, Edward, I'm so glad that you got to finish with such a glorious end.
It really was glorious, wasn't it? I mean, I think everyone apart from Amy can agree that really was sensational. I mean, it will go down as really a monumental win.
One of the biggest landslides we've ever had.
Yeah, and I'd like to think people will remember Amy's failure as opposed to my winning. I want it to be a kind of like Schadenfreude thing.
That is
her defeat
so gracious.
is so monumental that
you really are trying to take me down, aren't you? Before you leave, You're like, I'm just going to destroy everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Burn those bridges.
In all seriousness, Amy, it's been a pleasure to compete against you.
Oh, thanks, Edward. Same to you.
Yeah.
That's it for this episode. Thanks so much to Amy and to Edward for their company and conversation. Edward, we really will miss your competitive spirit and good-natured trash talking. And thank you, listener, for spending some of your time with us. I hope wherever you find yourself in this moment, the season meets you where you are. If it's a season of joy, may it provide all the merriment and laughter you desire. If it's a season of sorrow, may it bring consolation and connection. And may the year ahead be kind to us all. This podcast is produced by Listening Books, a UK charity that provides an audiobook lending service for over 120,000 members who find that an illness, disability, learning difficulty, or mental health condition affects their ability to read the printed word or hold a book. It's simple to join. For more information, head to our website, www.listening-books.org.uk.